Stuart and I were first married, we decided to have a child right away, and we were so excited to have that child. When we went to have a sonogram, though, we found out that something wasn't quite right with the child. The doctor was looking at all of the little body parts. There's the brain, oh, that was good, the spine. When he got to the heart, I asked him, and how does the heart look? And he said, I'm still looking. And then he said, why don't you come into my office and let's talk. And we sat down with him, and he told us that there was a problem with our baby's heart. The baby had what's called pulmonary atresia and hypoplastic right ventricle.
What that means is that the pulmonary valve, which goes from the right side of pumping chamber to the lungs, did not develop, and there was actually no pulmonary valve and no communication between the right side of pumping chamber, the right ventricle, and the arteries that go to the lung.
You can imagine as new parents how traumatic this time was for us, and it was our first child. We were so excited to have Anthony. We wanted him in our home. The hospital had a social worker come and speak with us, and the social worker told us that people who go through what we would be going through had an 80% chance or rate of divorce. And we decided right that very day that we were not going to let what we were going through with Anthony affect our marriage. If anything, we would make it strengthen our marriage. And we have. The perinatologist referred us to Primary Children's Hospital, where we spoke with a cardiologist, and she explained to us exactly what the problem was. There was a series of surgeries and a process that he would have to go through so that he would be able to live.
We basically only had 1 hour that we could be with him, and our family was there, and we really only had 1 hour before we needed to transport him from the University of Utah Hospital to Primary Children's Medical Center. And they needed to get him on some medication right away called prostaglandins, and that would keep his heart, the blood flowing through his heart in the same way that it was in the womb, or as close to it as possible. But Anthony did really well through the birth, and he weighed 8 pounds 12 ounces. He was a big boy, and he looked just healthy. He was just in great shape. So we spent an hour with him. Then we went down the hall, and the Lifeline team transported him from the U of U to Primary Children's, where he received his medication and where we set up where we would be for the next 30 days.
When Anthony was 6 days old, they did the first procedure on him. They initially planned to do a shunt, a PT shunt in his side. That, however, failed, and they weren't able to get the result they wanted. So the nurse came in during the surgery and told us that the surgery had failed. That they were going to go ahead and close him up and open him up from the front and put in a central shunt which would connect the aorta to the pulmonary artery. And they had not wanted to go into the front. They knew they'd have to go in there again later in the future and didn't want to go that direction, but they didn't really have a choice. One of the side effects of the surgery was because Anthony was on the operating table for such a long time, there was a lot of pressure and swelling inside of his chest, and the nerve to his left vocal cord was damaged, which caused his left vocal cord to be paralyzed. And therefore he aspirated everything that he would take in. He couldn't protect his airway, and everything that he would eat would go into his lungs. And of course that's a problem, so we had to end up having to NG feed him with a tube down his nose that ran into his stomach.
Because of this problem, Anthony had a hard time gaining weight, so we ended up staying in the hospital for 30 days.
When Anthony was about 6 months old, they decided it was time to prepare for the Glenn procedure. So we were on oxygen at home for a while, and when Anthony was 7 months old, we went back to Primary Children's and they performed a Glenn.
In Anthony's situation, there's only one pumping chamber. That has to be used to pump to the body, a high-pressure circuit, and blood will get to the lungs via gravity. And so you start by hooking up the veins from the upper body into the pulmonary artery. That's the Glenn procedure.
One of the things that they did along with the Glenn was they grafted a bit of tissue into his pulmonary artery, trying to enlarge the pulmonary artery. Unfortunately, that was contaminated, and so to compensate for that, they gave Anthony a bunch of antibiotics after the surgery. And one of the results of that was that he got an intestinal infection. And the bacteria that grew inside of his intestines was creating air pockets. And they were not expecting to see something like this in a child so big. Usually it's something that they would just see in preemies. But as soon as they realized what was going on and realized that his intestines were at the point that they thought they might, perforate, they brought in a surgery team that just stood by Anthony's side until they were able to get it under control. Unfortunately, they were able to get it under control, and Anthony never had to go through any sort of intestinal surgery.
Probably one of the worst days of my life was when we were in the hospital after the Glenn procedure, and they tried to get an IV in Anthony. One of the places was his head. They were trying to get an IV in his head. And so, as his father, I would hold him down, his legs and his arms, and hold him down as best I could while they tried to put an IV in his head. And he had been in the hospital, and he did not like getting poked. And he did not, he did not want the nurses around him or anybody around him. And so he was thrashing quite a bit. And I got to hold him down while they tried 6 different times to put an IV in his head. At that point, I told them that we were done for the night and that I wasn't going to put Anthony through that anymore that day. The IV was important, and so we didn't wait too long.
Anthony was so hard to get IVs into such tiny little veins, and he'd been poked so many times that they ended up going and doing a central line, putting an IV into major veins and hoping that it would last longer. Well, one of the other problems that we had while we were in the hospital with that surgery is that line clotted. And finally our pediatrician came and said we need to have this leg lifted under an ultrasound. And so they did an ultrasound on his leg and saw that he had clotted from his hip halfway down his thigh. And so then we had to go through the process of finding the right amount of blood thinners, and that kept us in the hospital another week to 10 days. The next procedure that they expected would have to happen was called the Fontan.
The Fontan operation is a wonderful operation. It is really the only way to separate the blue blood and the red blood in a child who has a 3-chamber heart. There's no other way to do it. You take all the blood that's coming back from the body and put it into the lungs now without a pumping chamber. And it has to flow via gravity. And this is not a natural situation for a person to have blood flowing around their body. And therefore, the body can react to it in different ways. And one of the problems that one can have is the congestion that can cause, because the blood doesn't flow as well than if you've got a strong muscular pumping chamber pumping into the lungs.
After we brought Anthony home, we were back to the hospital every couple of days checking. The doctors wanted to keep up on Anthony and make sure that he wasn't having any problems. And unfortunately, within a few days, Anthony started to have some accumulation of fluids in his chest.
And that's just a congestion that can occur because of the abnormal flow of blood through his heart and from his body into his lungs. And that's something that's usually fairly transient, and it was with Anthony. He had it immediately afterwards, and it was a problem for several weeks, I believe, and then it went away.
One of the side effects of the Fontan, however, showed up about 6 months after the surgery, and that is protein-losing enteropathy, or otherwise known as PLE.
And it's less common. I've seen, unfortunately, more of that than I would have liked to have seen, but it's an uncommon cause of puffiness and other problems that can occur after a Fontan operation. No one knows exactly why it occurs, but the most likely reason that they have this problem is that they have congestion. The blood now that had been flowing from the lower body, including the intestines, coming back to the heart before the fontan, had gone and been pumped back out to the body without getting oxygenated through the strong left-sided pumping chamber. Suddenly now, you take the heart and you divide it so that now that blood doesn't go into any pumping chamber. It now goes directly into the lungs, coming back from the legs and the intestines and the stomach and everywhere else. And it doesn't flow as readily and as easily. Therefore, there's congestion back. And we believe that that congestion back into the intestines somehow hurts them so that they do not absorb protein as well when you eat, or just that you and I would normally absorb protein, and they lose it in their stools, and they therefore have low blood protein.
With PLE, we were concerned as parents because there are certain things that they do to treat this, but if none of them worked, then the alternative is a transplant.
Well, there's no perfect treatment for it, but we usually go through a series of treatments, including trying to be sure that everything surgically is wide open on the fontan side of the circuit, that there's no narrowings. And Anthony did have a narrowing to the artery to his left lung. And because of that, Dr. Cowley went in and put a balloon and a stent, a metal stent, into that area to open that up. He continued with protein-losing enteropathy after that, and so the next step we went to was to treat him with increased oxygen and increased water pills, diuretics we call them, and then subsequently to get him onto prednisone or steroids. And he's responded very nice to steroids, and now our goal is to keep him stable on those steroids and to minimize any potential side effects from those steroids as we come down on the dose. And fortunately, we've been able to decrease its dosing, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to. If all those things are unsuccessful, there's some other things we can try, but we have had children who've ended up getting heart transplants after fontan operations because of protein-losing enteropathy.
Anthony has been such a joy to us. I would not trade the moments that we've had with him for anything, both the good and the bad. We were given the option of ending the pregnancy because of all the health problems that we knew that he would have. And I'm so grateful that we chose to have him, that we have this sweet little spirit in our home. He is such a joy to us, and everything that he's put us through no fault of his own, just because of the health problems that he's come with, has been worth it to have him be a part of our lives.
He's a very courageous little boy who's been through more than certainly I've been through in my lifetime with regard to those kinds of things, and he's done wonderfully, I think.
I love Anthony with all of my heart, and I'm so glad that he's part of my family. He has made our lives so happy. His little personality is so sweet, and he has such a great sense of humor, and he's so fun to play with and be with. He is a mellow personality and does not get disturbed easily, and is so very pleasant to be around. There's not one person that knows him that does not like him. He is so wonderful, and we're so lucky that he's our boy and that he's a part of our family. He is just a wonderful person to be around, and I'm glad that we've had a chance to talk about him a little bit.
Hi, my name is Anthony. I like dinosaurs and Star Wars.